Milí diváci, vítajte pri dnešnom treťom podujatí 7. ročníka Košických Hanusových dní. Košické Hanusové dni sú kultúrno-akademický festival na priesočníku kresťanstva a dnešnej spoločnosti. Hlavným organizátorom festivala je spoločenstvo Ladislava Hanusa, ktoré je to katolícke akademické spoločenstvo, ktoré je otvorené pre všetkých ľudí hľadajúcich pravdu. Ak aj vy ste ľudia, ktorí hľadáte pravdu a chceli by ste byť súčasťou tohto spoločenstva, tak sa môžete prihlásiť do nášho formačno-akademického programu. Otvárame už 7. semestrálny program v Košiciach vo februári. Prihlasovanie už je spustené a bude bežať až do januára. Ak to stihnete do decembra, tak budete mať zľavu 10%. Naše spoločenstvo oslavuje už svoje 20. výročie a pri tejto príležitosti zakladáme Inštitút Ladislava Hanusa, ktorým chceme tú našu službu pre kresťanskú kultúru a verejný život posunúť ešte na vyššiu úroveň. A ak sa vám páči to, čo Veselha robíme a chcete, aby sme toho robili ešte viac a ešte lepšie, tak vás pozývame podporiť nás aj finančne. Môžete tak urobiť prostredníctvom našej kampane na donio.sk/ILH. Ďakujeme. Hlavní partneri festivalu sú Fond na podporu umenia, ktorý podporil festival z verejných zdrojov, spoločnosť Plaut, Opáctvo Radu premonštrátov, Lesy Jasov a nadácia Fides et Ratio. Hlavní mediálni partneri, konzervatívny denník Postoj, portál Nové mesto a denník Štandard. No a teraz za malú chvíľu začne diskusia s názvom Sexuálne zneužívanie aj v cirkvi. No a môžete sa do nej zapojiť aj prostredníctvom aplikácie Slido. Heslo je #KHD22. A môžete využiť aj našu Wi-Fi s názvom Veritas, ktorá je voľná. No a teraz už odovzdávam slovo moderátorovi dnešného večera, Jánovi Heribanovi. Nech sa páči.
Prajem vám pekný večer. Verím, že môj mikrofón...
Good evening. I hope my mic is working.
Vítam vás na diskusii na tému...
I'd like to welcome you all at this discussion on the topic that has already been mentioned. I don't know how many of you are present. I cannot see you through these lights, but I'm sure also with online audience, there's a lot of us. I hope this discussion will bring us a lot. My name is Ján Heriban. This topic is very serious, more and more discussed also in Slovakia in the past years. It's a sexual abuse which happens also in church. I'll just briefly mention how it will be going today. I will be posing questions approximately first 35 minutes. Then, as you have already heard, there is an application Slido with code #KHD22. You can use Wi-Fi.
Dovolte mi predstaviť našich dnešných hostí.
Let me introduce our today guests, Dreher, who you already know. He was here with us yesterday, a writer, journalist whose best-selling books were translated into 12 books. He is the chief journalist in the American Conservatives. He's publishing the blog about different things. In 2017, his best-selling book, The Benedict Option, was described by the New York Times as the most important religious book of the decade. And he lives in Louisiana with his wife and children. Good evening, Rod. Today here with us is also Sister Agnieszka Jarkowska. She is a nun from the Institute of the Capuchin Sisters of the Sacred Heart of Jesus. She's an expert in pedagogy, pastoral vocations, and protection of minors from sexual abuse, with an academic diploma in the protection of minors from the Pontifical Gregorian University in Rome. So she's a very experienced person as it comes to this theme. Since 2019, she has been a member of the Center for the Protection of Minors in Košice and a member of the Commission of the Slovak Bishops' Conference for Cases of Sexual Abuse of Minors. She deals with prevention and assistance to victims of sexual abuse, and as she mentioned before, in these days, weeks, she's helping these victims. So, good evening. And here is also Father Andrej Kačmar, Vice Rector of the seminary and since 2019 Director of the Center for the Protection of Minors of the Archdiocese of Košice. He also serves as the secretary of the KBA's Commission for the Protection of Minors in the Church. He completed his studies in canon law at the Pontifical Lateran University and additional studies at the Gregorian University. Good evening to you too. As I read your profiles, I felt really small in this discussion, but it is a challenge. I have a lot of respect for this. I am very glad to have to my right this very great person. I'd like to tell about Rod that he has been dealing for a long time with this topic and has a great view from can bring a view from America. So this topic, sexual abuse, we can start with you, Sister Agnieszka, as you are a woman, as a lady. Which forms sexual abuse can have? Maybe not all of us can imagine what everything we could understand in this theme. Usually when we think about sexual abuse, we think of sexual intercourse, and we think that if it did not happen, nothing bad has happened, definitely. But however, it is a much larger topic. It has different forms, but we are trying to explain it that there are forms through touches and without touches. It can have the form of intercourse, which can happen with the penis or a finger or another object, but all of these forms are possible, and it can happen even if the children is in clothes, it's not naked. So it's like stepping over his boundary, and it is already a sexual abuse. What we cannot understand are the forms of not touching, and this is when we show to this child pornographic content, or forcing the children to looking at somebody who's masturbating, or forcing them into masturbating. All of these forms are forms of abuse, and all of them are very severe. It is not mathematics, it's not what we usually say that sexual intercourse is much worse, but also these forms of not touching are very severe. And I also know a woman who has been who has saw somebody that this thing has been done to them. So all these forms are very important to be reminded of. Thank you very much for this introduction. Maybe not all of us realize really what all of this entails. Father Kačmar, let's see how the Church approaches the topic of the sexual abuse in Slovakia, and then we will look at how America and other parts of the world approach it. This topic is more mentioned in Slovakia in the past years. Maybe also it is connected to the foundation of the center. You are on the head. How the Church in Slovakia approaches this problem. So we have to say that we are just at the beginning, or that we are slowly defining it in the past years. I'd say since the 2018, 2017, when the first course for protection of the minors in cooperation with the Gregorian University in Rome, and then in 2018. But we know that the cases happened also in the past, and the opening, or I'd rather say it is a problem. Even one case is terrible if the priest does it, but I'd like to mention how we approached it. So how? So the answer from the past few years, since the first regulation was passed in 2014, we know that from Rome there was help for the conferences, for bishop conferences, to make these regulations. Our first regulation came in 2014, and the problematic how to react, how to respond correctly. We see that sometimes we reacted later when the media opened the case or civil members. Later or never. In some cases it was even never. We can say that we were waiting, or we didn't know enough. We didn't know enough details about this problem, and we didn't think that it touched us here in Slovakia. So the regulation already existed. So was the problem in the enforcement, in the application? So the problem was that we didn't talk about this so openly as we do now in the past years. So we know this was in 2002 in Boston when the movie Spotlight came out, and these themes were talked about in other states. We still thought here that it doesn't concern us, that in Europe it does not exist, it doesn't exist in our countries, in the neighboring countries. So maybe we don't have any cases of that. So at the end we see the statistics in Germany, or if we see Poland, if we look at Poland, they also, the bishops of Poland have made statistics. So we see that we were not talking about it enough, especially not about sexual abuse, that it is in fact an abuse, and that the sexual abuse arises from the misuse of the power, the authority, and the misuse of, or taking advantage of the trust. We will talk about it, so I would like to ask you for a short answer. How or where we moved in the time. So you said that it is now more discussed. Is that an engine that the church is much more controlled by the public? And so it doesn't have, it cannot wait anymore. So we were not paying enough attention to this problem. And so I say that in the past few years, we are very active, also thanks to this regulation which came after the revision of the penal code, penal law in 2021. So we are talking more about this. We see it also in the media. When we turn on the TV, we read the newspaper. We always read that something somewhere has happened and how they approached it, how the clergy approached that. Did we move closer to the cases and how to solve them? I think we try to be more transparent and not to just swipe it away. So I'd like to say that it is not only about it's also about the prevention that Sister Agnieszka is doing. She's working with youngsters just to know more about it. Rod, let's look into America. Father mentioned the events in Boston in 2002. It was somehow another earthquake in your life. Also, where did America move in this past few years?
Well, in 2001, I was a reporter, a columnist at the New York Post. And we had a case in New York City of abuse. This was before the scandal became big all across America. And I interviewed a priest, a really brave priest, Father Tom Doyle, who he was known for speaking out for victims. And anytime anybody wrote about abuse, they would call Father Tom for some comment. At the end of the interview, he said to me, "Rod, I can tell that you're a serious Catholic, and I want to warn you that if you continue to investigate this story, you are going to go to places darker than you can even imagine." I said, "Well, Father, thank you for the warning, but I feel that I have to write about this because I'm a Catholic. I want the church to be clean of this, and also because I'm a father. I have a baby boy at home." He said, "Oh, I want to encourage you to keep writing about it, but you just need to be prepared spiritually for the darkness." Well, I wasn't. I thought because I went to Mass every week, I went to regular confession, I said my rosary, I thought everything was fine, that as long as I had the arguments for the Catholic faith clear in my head, that my faith could withstand anything. And then came 2002, January 2002. That's when we had the big trial in Boston, the trial of Father John Geoghegan, who was a serial molester. The cardinals of Boston had moved him around from parish to parish. He destroyed so many lives. That trial changed everything in America because it was the first big trial of clerical abuse in the age of the internet. So everybody all over America could understand what was happening in Boston at the same time. That had never happened before. Secondly, the judge in that case in Boston, for the first time, refused the church's request to keep all the records sealed. In other words, outside of the public eye. Instead, she released them all. So the Boston Globe and all the media knew exactly what the bishops had known and what they had done about it. And it was a horrific tale of contempt the bishops had for the laity. There were letters that came out from faithful lay Catholics writing to Cardinal Archbishops of Boston saying, "You've got to help. This is what this priest, Father Geoghegan, is doing. Please stop. He's destroying families." They didn't care. They seemed to care more about protecting the image of the church. Well, from that event, from Boston, suddenly the story broke big nationwide. Around that time, I'd moved over to National Review magazine, a conservative magazine that a lot of Catholics trusted. But I began writing about the scandal for National Review. And because I was known as a conservative Catholic, a lot of conservatives who didn't want to talk about the scandal because they thought it would only help the liberals and the people who hate the church, they talked to me about it. I found out that spring, the spring of 2002, that Cardinal McCarrick, then the Archbishop of Washington, D.C., had in fact been molesting seminarians all along. The whole world knew it in 2018. I knew about it in 2002 because a priest told me, and others, I found out from others. Cardinal McCarrick had a lawyer call my boss in New York and say, "We want to kill this story. Rod Dreher is going to write something embarrassing about the cardinal. We want to kill the story." Well, my boss didn't kill the story, but I couldn't write the story because nobody who knew what was happening would talk about it on the record or give me documents. And under American libel law, you can't write about it, even if you know it's true, unless you have proof. So I had to watch, as a Catholic father, Cardinal McCarrick go on national TV because he was the man that Pope John Paul II appointed to be the leader of the American Church's response to the abuse scandal. I had to watch that guy go on national TV and say, oh, we had no idea. It was so bad. We're trying to clean it up, knowing that this man was a molester of priests and seminarians. In the end, I ended up losing my Catholic faith. I'm still a Christian. I'm an Orthodox Christian. But Father Doyle was right. I was not prepared spiritually for this. I was not prepared for what it would do to my soul and to my faith to talk on the phone to people like a farmer in the state of Kansas whose son committed suicide, 19-year-old, blew his brains out with a gun. He was one of 5 suicides, all related to the same abusive priest. 5 altar boys killed themselves because of this one priest. And the Diocese of Wichita, Kansas, knew what this priest was doing, and they kept moving him around in the 80s and 90s. That sort of thing, to me as a Catholic and as a father, it destroyed my ability to believe. There's a long story, I won't go into it now, but the thing that was the final, we say the straw that broke the camel's back, was my wife and I and our kids were getting close to this one priest, and we still believed in those days, the two of us, that the problem was mostly with liberal priests. This guy was super conservative, and we were getting close to him, and then I found out that he was a liar. He was an accused molester, and that he had lied to us. I told my wife about it. I said, I found out the truth about Father Chris. And she collapsed onto the ground and was crying and pounding the floor, saying, we can never trust them again. Well, by the grace of God, I didn't lose my Christian faith at all. I became an Orthodox Christian, but I didn't become the sort of Christian who believed that this doesn't happen in every church. I think it does happen in every church. But I had been such an ideological Catholic. I thought that I understood the problem. It was between the liberals and the conservatives. No, it's everywhere.
Poučila sa Amerika
Did America somehow educated itself from this event? Would something like this happen today in this extent?
That's a great question, and I don't know the answer. Certainly the American church, American Catholics, and American society in general is far more aware of sexual abuse in the church, not just the Catholic Church, but the Protestant church and all churches. This evil doesn't know any barriers. It exists everywhere, but the place it should exist least of all is in the church, because the church is holy. I think what has happened, though, it's been 20 years since the scandal broke big in Boston. And we have been told, or American Catholics have been told time and time again, it's over, we fixed it, we have the procedures in place, the system is working. And then something else will happen, and they'll find out that the system is only as good as the character of those in charge of running it. And so McCarrick was well involved, heavily involved, not only in American Catholic life, but in international Catholic life, even though the Vatican knew as far back as the year 2000 exactly what he had done. And now we've seen that Pope Francis has allowed Bishop Zanchetta of Argentina to remain in office or remain in a position of power, even though he was credibly accused of abuse. There was a case that was reported last week about France, about bishops being allowed to retire under a false story when in fact they were accused of abuse. So could it happen today? It's much less likely to happen today. But I think that you would be foolish to believe that the scandal was in the past, because so few of these bishops have ever had to pay a price. There was a report that came out just this week that the Catholic Church in America did on its own, interviewing priests and bishops about the state of the church. It was really quite shocking, because the bishops think they're doing a great job, but the actual priests, the parish priests, so few of them have faith in their bishops. And a lot of it is the fact that bishops have covered up to try to protect themselves, their friends, and the image of the church. What they've done in the end, though, is almost completely destroy the moral authority of the church. It's going to take many, many years to gain that back.
Áno, chcel som to aj ja tomu taký.
Well, I also wanted to make an open end. I know it will take a lot of time, and it's hard to say if we ever reach the level of 100% of all the cases solved. We can move forward when we are talking about medialization of these cases. For example, so there were cases in our media, if we think about Bishop Carter, who was granted a suspension and so on. So sometimes the investigation shows that the person was innocent, as happened in the case of Bishop Carter, but also there are still voices who say it was an offense to the church, why this happened. Can we say it like that? Should the church take this personally and consider it that somehow somebody attacked us? We could better say it was a false accusation, but we know from the legal point of view that somebody who says something like this has bad intention, and this is hard to prove. But the whole process, we know the outcome of the investigation, but also the final verdict can be innocent or guilty. I would like to mention to say that if somebody is innocent, we cannot guarantee that nothing happened. Sometimes we don't read these verdicts, and we cannot comment on how this should be done, if whether Bishop was doing everything right, whether his steps were right, that he interrogated all the victims, everybody who was who had something to do with this. We could talk about these false accusations or bad accusations, but what is put into light, in every case is individual, of course, and I think that's why it is very we have to be quite modest into talking about this. So you started your answer whether it is direct intention of staining the name of the church. Sometimes the media inform about this without intentionally talking about this in the right time. So if they do their own job, can we consider it to be an attack? I think if they are looking for the truth and they are trying to help us uncover the truth, because the truth will revelate you the gospel text, and they are not looking for a sensation. If the media are doing their job and they were the Pope Francis thanked them that they are trying to bring light to these cases. If they are not tendential, it is a terrible message, of course. It's very terrible. But the whole process of all of this, we cannot see, we are not able to see in the background. And I think the signal should be direct, that it is really transparent, objectively, and it is exactly defined. If it's not the case, we shouldn't be surprised that what we in the church didn't take care of, somebody else will take care of. What about you, Sister Agnieszka? Should the media apologize if they have done it intentionally, even if they will not admit it? So let's say they inform about this continuously, and then in the end the verdict was innocent. There were chances they should apologize. Should they? We should try to look at this reality from the point of view of the victim who's trying to, for many years, to be heard. She's trying to find somebody to talk to. She's looking, or he or she is looking for the ways, and sometimes a lot of people don't trust them. And sometimes also in the family, he or she is looking for the therapist, and the only one who wants to hear her or his story are the media, and the only one who he or she can turn to is the last institute they can turn to. They still pay them for it. Sometimes it may happen that yes, they would bully me, they would talk about me in media, I will receive bad emails, and that the whole environment will, the whole society will know me. I will become somehow a public person. And also they should ask themselves whether they want to do this. But if the media should apologize, the question, I have never seen this, but I think this is the first thing that is very important, whether from the side of Vatican, but also the Conference of Bishops of any country. We have to have a clear message. There was a case, the process, and this is the decision, the verdict. So whether we can accept that, yes, that he is innocent, or accept that even if we like the priest, we have to accept and admit to ourselves that he has done these things. And sometimes the media do not do a great job in this, because sometimes they mention it just briefly and very quickly, and we have to give them time. I think the media has done a great job in opening this topic, and not to be afraid of this, because we are searching for the truth. We will talk about the victim.
Okay, so I would just remind you that we have Slido, so you can also ask questions. So now, your reaction, Rod?
Yeah, I do think that the media have been very good on the whole in bringing these horrible truths to light. I think they have served, generally speaking, a very positive role in purifying the church. However, one of the most shocking things to me as a journalist was to see how much of the American media completely refused to report on the homosexual aspect of the scandal. An authoritative university report found that between 82 and 85% of the abuse cases in America within the church involved males, and not usually pre-pubescent males, but post-pubescent males, like boys 12, 13, 14, 15 years old. And I found early on in my reporting that one of the most important aspects of the scandal, what made the scandal happen, was gay networks within the priesthood who protected each other. It wasn't, of course, that gay priests all molest. That's not true at all. But I found out from talking to this one man, he's now dead, but he was a guy named Richard Sipe. Sipe was one of the top academics writing about pre-clerical sexual behavior. And Sipe told me early on, and Father Tom Doyle, even though they're both liberals, church liberals, they confirmed this was true, that the whole scandal was run by networks of sexually active gay priests within the seminaries, within chanceries, even in the episcopate, among the bishops, that even if they weren't involved in molesting boys themselves, they still covered up for it because they were all guilty of something, or many of them were guilty of something. Well, the media didn't want to talk about that at all because they did not want to encourage people to believe the stereotype that all gay men are molesters. Of course, all gay men are not molesters, but the media managed the story. They did not see it as important to report the whole story and let people figure this out. They saw it as more important to manage the story to keep people from having the wrong thoughts about the church. Now, this mattered in a very big way in the year 2012. I got a call one day, this was 10 years after the scandal broke big in Boston. I got a call one day from a reporter who was writing a piece for the New York Times Magazine about Cardinal McCarrick. He had evidence, he had found court evidence that had been buried in legal files that McCarrick had made a settlement with a seminarian he raped. And this reporter got an interview on the record with this seminarian. It was fantastic. And the reporter just called me because somebody said, Rod Dreher might have some information for you. Well, it turns out the reporter had more information than I did. I said, thank God somebody's finally going to report this. I said to the reporter, when will you publish the story? He said, maybe 1 month. Well, 2 months passed. Nothing happened. I called the reporter and I said, what's happening? He said, I have no idea. I have a new editor on the story, and he keeps delaying, and I can't figure it out. I said to the reporter, is he gay? He goes, well, yeah, he's a gay man. His gay marriage announcement was in the New York Times last week. I said, he's protecting McCarrick. And this reporter, his background was in financial news. He said, what do you mean? And I had to tell him about how this works. Well, eventually, 6 years later, the New York Times, a different reporter, reported on what McCarrick had done because the Cardinal of New York had made the announcement that this was true. I bring that up because this is something that is not really appreciated about the media. They've done a fantastic job in many ways in reporting on these horrible things that have happened, but they have also distorted, for their own political reasons, the true nature of the scandal.
Ono to tak trochu aj znelo, ako keby ste už skoro boli ako vyšetrovatelia.
Okay, so it seems to me that it was like you were like investigators, but reporter has got like different kind of mission. But if you think about the identity of reporter, so that he wouldn't be an investigator.
I'm not sure I understand the question. The reporter should not be like a criminal investigator?
Yes, so that he is not like investigator or judge that has got some verdicts, but he should be to just inform the audience and public.
Yeah. A journalist should be about telling the truth and letting the public make its own mind up. But we have seen a tremendous change in American journalism, a change in the mentality over the course of my own career. I was trained as a journalist in the 1980s to see reporting any story as trying to tell the most complete version and fair version of the facts that you can. Now the younger journalists think it's more important to manage the story for ideological reasons, and they don't even see anything wrong with it. And I think that we could see in a very powerful way this play out in the coverage of the abuse story. So many reporters in America, it's well known that that most journalists are secular and liberal, but we still got a lot of very good journalism about the scandal from secular liberal reporters. I have no complaint about that. At the same time, their own prejudices kept them from telling the complete truth about what was happening. That still has not been talked about. I hear it all the time from Catholic priests, friends of mine, who say that this is the one aspect of the abuse story that has never been fully discussed because it would raise many more questions about the the role of gay men in the priesthood than the journalists want people to talk about.
Thank you very much. I have also some more questions for Andrej Kačmar and Agnieszka, sister. So what do you think about this media coverage regarding abuse? Whether I asked whether there are some misuses in terms of abuse, of sexual abuse in church. I'm on the side of victims, yes, so I hear it from the side of victims, so I know who they are talking about. And I met this person, and I do not think that the person would go against the church if I see his or her suffering. I agree with the sister. I do not think that the media would destroy the church. They would like to reveal the truth. In many cases, which we hear, but I think that it's truth and that it's very helpful. There was a remark that everyone has his or her role. So if a reporter is playing the role of investigator, of course we should give competence to real investigators, but they should control whether what they do is transparent and truthful. So now there is one question on Slido, but you can ask more questions, of course, and we are interested in your questions. And we have the third question. So how to approach the victims of the sexual abuse. And now we would like to have a look at the whole process from the point of view of perpetrator and victim. Sister Agnieszka, what the victim experiences and what happens when something like this takes place. What do you mean? Okay, so you mean the abuse itself. Okay, so we think about the abuse of children, so we can imagine an adult person who is like more smarter, and who can abuse, sometimes misuse the child in a way that he or she is not that powerful, and it's not a person in a dark alley. Yeah, it's usually someone who we know. It can be a coach, it can be a priest. So it is someone who is familiar to the child, and the child knows him and trusts him, and so that the child doesn't even know that he or she is abused. What are the techniques that the perpetrator uses? So it's a grooming. Yeah, so first of all, we can see it's a normal kind of relationship. Yeah, so they are like getting familiar. Yeah, he knows about the hobbies of a person. Then they are friends. They have secrets. They spend more time together. If we imagine a priest who works with altar boys, so he chooses one of them and spends more time with him, and the boy feels unique, and then the perpetrator knows that there is maybe a lack of family background, yeah, that parents are not interested in child, for example. And then the child knows that, oh great, someone is listening to me right now. But then in this process of grooming, there is a difference in a normal kind of relationship. Yes, so he wants to test the victim, and perpetrator wants to know where are the limits. So first of all, maybe embrace or hug, and maybe whether the altar boy would be able to stay with priest maybe 2 hours after the service. And for example, priest can tell him, okay, you can play with the internet, and although your parents do not allow this to you, and gradually these limits are moved further and further. And there can be like, she can be given drugs or alcohol, and then later the child is like really surprised. Yeah, first of all, it was a really great relationship. Yeah, it was like that the child was unique, felt unique, and now later there was something embarrassing for the child. I cannot understand that, and that's the main thing about the sexual activity. If it's a very small child, he or she doesn't understand the sexual activity, and these are some kind of things that it can be okay, but later the child doesn't like this game. And then the child feels guilty somehow, and perpetrator wants the child to come to him, and then the child feels guilty, and then he or she thinks that I cannot tell it to anybody. Yeah, but we cannot make like perpetrator from the child, but perpetrator like makes him guilty. Also, parents can do something with it, but they are also in a difficult situation because the child doesn't say anything. But what does the child do when something like this happens? But if the child told something like this to parents, would they believe him? I always say that when I talk about prevention, distress in family, when whatever bad happens, when you do something bad, come to me and I will accept you. And this kind of open communication can help you, and it really saved lives of many children. But what was the question? I'm lost. I looked at the slide, I was lost too. It doesn't matter. I was asking about the role of parents. If a child says that, oh, there's something wrong in my life, but they say, okay, that priest is a good guy, he wouldn't do that. But then the perpetrator has got like some kind of mask. If a child says that, okay, let's say my neighbor, I don't want to help my neighbor because he plays some strange games with me. And what is uncomfortable for you? And we cannot say that there is some kind of symptom of sexual abuse, and then we know that child was the victim. But we can see the difference in the child's behavior. Let's say if a child had certain hobby and extracurricular activity, and then he or she doesn't want to go there, or doesn't want to meet friends, or change before PE. So we should ask always what's happening. Yeah, but we have to communicate with children.
I appreciate what you're saying, sister. It's so important. I knew a victim in New York when I was reporting there who was raped by the priest who was the principal, the headmaster of his Catholic school. He told his mother, the boy did, his mother slapped him and said, "Don't you ever say such a horrible thing about a priest." And she effectively turned him back over to his rapist. It destroyed his life. I found, and this was in the 1960s, but I found that one of the most difficult obstacles into cleaning the mess up in the church was the laity, because so many people in parishes, even if their children weren't abused, they didn't want to hear these stories because it disturbed their inner peace. They wanted to believe that the church was a place of safety, of goodness, and that everything was perfect in the church. And this was so discouraging to victims, I found, and also to priests who were trying to do the right thing, because they took real risk in standing up and saying that this happened to me, or we have to do something about it. If the entire congregation in the parish would turn against them, it was a terrible, terrible thing. And again, it's not just in the church. One of the biggest problems we have with sexual abuse of children in the United States is with the boyfriends of mothers, of single mothers. You get into a situation where a single mother is afraid to lose this man, even though she knows the man is sexually molesting one of her children. And this mentality is so destructive to children when parents and others in a parish would rather protect their own sense of security than to stand up and say, this is wrong, we have to stop it.
Thank you, Rod, for your point of view, international point of view. We have more questions. So now we would like to conclude this part of discussion. And I had more questions about the perpetrator and the victim, but sometimes we do not know everything about the process, so it's really difficult to approach. So we mentioned the last regulation of bishops, of Conference of Bishops in Slovakia. So how we should approach to the church, in terms of child abuse. So what are the rights that they have? So there was, so we moved, and there is like the interview with the victim and the perpetrator in a preliminary investigation. So preliminary investigation begins when the bishop or somebody from clergy gets to know something about such case of sexual abuse. If anyone comes with such information, can come to bishop and tell him the bishop has this kind of competence, or in the place where this happened. So, of course, bishop is not an investigator. Bishops needs to have experts, psychologists, psychotherapists, and other experts, also psychiatrists. And what is very important, he should be a father who would listen to both sides, both parties. And if there is like delicts, so we were talking about tactile and non-tactile forms. So this regulation brings that. And what is very important, that based on this, bishop can start a preliminary investigation. Victim, of course, we are talking. I don't want to talk very technically, but victim can come and be there with adult person who he or she confides in. That is very important in a preliminary investigation, so that you can imagine, for example, bishop, that then there is investigator Then there is someone who takes notes, and then there is a victim who was abused by priest, and it's very difficult to talk about that and get back to the time what happened. Isn't there any place for laymen so that they can also be part of an investigation? Yeah, it's possible. But first of all, in the first meeting, we know that bishop can also tell someone else to do that, but of course he or she should be a lawyer. But what we need to make secure that everything should be described as it really happened. So there are real investigators who do not have any doubts, and nobody can doubt the victim, whether the words that he or she said were right or not. Was it really like that? So, is it? Do we have someone who should investigate the person and make sure so that he or she make sure that everything will be recorded as it really was? We had one training in Slovakia and Czech Republic for ecclesiastical courts, and there was also it was also online, and so we talk about the way how the members of tribunals should lead the investigation. Now it's taking place not only in terms of prevention in different dioceses, and as it was in Trnava, for example. Now there will be some more questions, and if you have any more questions, you can also use Slido. And we will start with Slido. Sister Agnieszka, it's a question for you. So do you have also a chance to talk to perpetrators? What do you think? What leads someone to do something like this? I only talk to the victims. As you mentioned about homosexuality, there are many different reasons why a person can abuse a child. For example, if we think about the statistics of St. Luke Institute in the United States, it's an institution for priests who abused children. There are many reasons. More than 50% of such priests were heterosexual, despite the fact that they abused boys. But usually it's a vast crisis or some kind of immaturity of priests. It can be a disease. It's very individual. It's a very big spectrum, wide spectrum. What is important, and many perpetrators talk about this, that they have modus operandi and they cannot move on. And if they have such ideas in their minds, okay, one way is to do it by masturbation, but it doesn't work. So it even propels the engine. So then the perpetrator needs to find the victim, and after the act, he needs it more and more, and so it takes place again, and it's a kind of cycle.
So those people are still waiting for someone who would tell that they really did it, and they need that, and then they need to admit that they have a problem, and they need to find the point where it really began, and what is very, very important in this institute. So these priests were also the victims of sexual abuse. They were abused by priests. And then they came to know that I did the same thing that was done to me. Can this cycle be a kind of like addiction? Can we see it as an addiction? Yes, of course, it's a kind of addiction. But these forms has to be stronger and stronger. First of all, it's just one. It happened one time, and then, of course, it's happening more and more. Sister Agnieszka told that these priests can have mental problems, but of course there is a question that maybe after years it will be revealed, these kind of affairs. But my next question is like, what is the situation today? Do we plan, maybe, are we planning to do something more about this? I also talk to seminarists. We talk about these issues openly. And besides the psychological tests, they have to take it before they are ordained a priest. We talk about psychosexual development of a person, about different stages of life, how like the future priests were treated in a childhood and later. And of course, the candidate needs to talk about these things openly. And from the psychological tests, we cannot know or notice that someone will abuse children in the future. But the one thing that I need to say is that this sexual abuse is a misuse of power, and we have to look at it from the point of view of how the task is approached, how they tackle the power in church, how they tackle with their roles, and how they are going to work with it. For example, the issue of narcissism is a vast problem. Then homosexuality, and how this is discussed. For example, when the candidates talk to spirituals, whether they open it in front of clergy or vice rector or prefect, it's very important how they approach this topic. For example, when in the past, when they were like altar boys, when they had, if they had such experience, it can be a transitional period of maturity. When they are getting mature, on the one way, it can be like a transitional period before they are ordained a priest. So in 3 years, this should be tackled.
I just want to add that I feel very bad for the Catholic Church and for all churches now. Over the last 20 years in my country, we have all become so much more aware of the evil of child sex abuse. The Catholic Church and all churches have become better at trying to spot it, at trying to fight it within the churches. At the same time, American culture has become so much more sexualized, particularly around children. Right now in America, the big popular thing are drag shows for kids. They put little boys in female clothes and have them come out there and perform in a very sexualized way. You have academics talking about how we must show more compassion for pedophiles. We mustn't call them pedophiles anymore. We have to call them minor attracted persons, MAPs, et cetera, et cetera. It's shocking how fast American society is collapsing. The moral standards are collapsing. If a Catholic priest did even the tiniest bit of the sort of thing that happens all the time with drag queen story hour and these drag shows for kids, people would freak out. They would not be able to handle it, and yet it's happening in our society. Plus, internet pornography is everywhere. I was talking just last week to a chaplain, a Lutheran pastor who works as a chaplain for the FBI. He said, you and ordinary people would not believe what law enforcement officers, FBI agents, police officers, and so forth, are having to deal with in terms of fighting child pornography and child sex abuse. It's not in the church. This is in general society, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. All of this is hidden from normal people, but the internet has made it, and the collapse generally of standards of sexual propriety, particularly around children, has made it much worse. So I think the challenge facing not only the Catholic Church, but every church going forward is going to be made much, much more difficult by the general collapse in society of barriers against the sexualization of children.
If someone has a question here in the audience, you can ask, so please raise your hand. Do you have a question? I cannot see very clearly whether anyone has a question. If there is no question in the audience, do we have a question? Okay.
Good evening. I would like to ask how better prevent the sexual abuse in church. Which steps can we take? Is this a question for somebody concrete or just in general? It's in general. Okay, so anyone can react who wants. We already mentioned something in terms of prevention courses, but Sister Agnieszka, you can start. I don't know how to answer, since it should concern only the church, but I think in general the prevention of the sexual abuse, the first thing is to talk about it. We have to talk about it. The sexuality is a taboo topic for us also in the church, but I think also in the families. So this is for me the first step. I very much insist on the appeal on the sexual education. The people should, the children should understand their body, that God created their body, and that every part of their body has some purpose. So I'll interrupt you. So this education should be done where? The family or the school? Yes, I will mention this. So there is a phase where the children learns to name the parts of his body. So for him, these words, penis, vagina, elbow, anything like this is the same for him. And he doesn't feel shame about anything. So that's what I want to say. So for me, the first thing where this education should take place is family. But usually the parents are very weak. They don't know how to talk about this topic with their children. And if the case of the child is already 15 years old, it's already too late. So the families should be supported in how to talk with their children about this, how to create a safe place in the family, and the church should support this. So this is already being done. We have some formation courses of the priests, the monks, so then they work in their own parishes, or they work with the young people. The Salesians lecture their animators, the hosts, they create codexes of behaviors, how to behave in different places, how in different safe places. So this should be a process how to create the safe place. But the church is not only the institution, but it is also us, the people. Thank you very much. I have information that we only see 4 questions, but we have 13. So to make the most of it, we have some 15 minutes. It is possible that if you have a minute answer.
Yeah, very brief.
Very brief.
I appreciate what Sister has said here, and it's very uncomfortable for me to sit here next to a nun and hear her speak so bluntly about sexuality, but this is my problem. She's doing the right thing. No parent, no teacher, nobody, no responsible adult can always be present around a child. You have to build into the child a sense of self-protection, and that requires teaching the child, as Sister said, about the goodness of their body, but also about how no one has the right to touch them there. You can't expect the child to know this unless you tell them, and you have to overcome the sense of taboo that we have about speaking this way. And I applaud Sister for speaking so clearly about this.
Poďme hneď na ďalšiu otázku.
Let's move to another question. Can the victims of the abuse stay in the church? How to keep their fight? We can add that the already mentioned regulation supports this. Who wants to react? Father Andrej? Okay. It is very difficult. And again, a lot of these victims find then their relation to God, what they have lost is a question of belief. They've been going to church, and the faith in God and everything that they lived was ruined because it was connected to the priest that they trusted, because he represented the God on earth. So they trusted him because he represents, he celebrates the ceremonies, and then it is a step back, and he has to again find such a great priest to confess, somebody to confess to, or somebody who should lead him back to God. What has been already said, that not he is to blame, but the perpetrator is to blame, and that the victim is not responsible for what has happened. And he or she usually asks himself or herself, where was God when all of this was happening? And we know that these victims are an instrument through which God has suffered. And we have to hear this voice of suffering, all of us, that These victims represent God, God's cries, God's suffering, and we have to very hear this. And it is very difficult to bring them back to this community. Czech Premonstratarian who made an interview with the Czech portal said in terms of the priests, they should be adequately critical. They are still people, they shouldn't be as gods. Do you agree with this? It is very strong in Slovakia, the position of the priest still, but they or we cannot exchange the extent of that. Some professor told us that the life of the priest begins behind the doors of his room, not in the public, but it's all in how he lives in private. And it is about that he doesn't look critically into all these events, that we didn't manage to deal with the education, the formation, and that we overlooked a lot of things. Does anyone want to add something?
Yeah, I was not abused, but I still left the Catholic Church over the abuse scandal because I was absolutely destroyed spiritually by it. And I look back and to think about the things that I did wrong, the things that I did to make myself more vulnerable to losing my faith in this sort of thing. One of the main things I did was I became a clericalist. In other words, I was an adult convert to Catholicism, and I held a very, very high view of the institutional church. I thought I was being a faithful Catholic for being that way. And so it was more shocking to me, more scandalous when these stories came out. I had fellow Catholic friends who were just as angry as I was, but they didn't lose their Catholic faith because they did not have that super high view of the church. But there's something more important too. When I was coming into the Catholic Church in my 20s, I was working at a newspaper, and a woman who worked at the paper, a photographer, an older woman, said, "Oh, I hear you're interested in Catholicism. I'm a Catholic. Would you like to come work with me at the Missionaries of Charity soup kitchen this weekend?" And I thought, that's Mother Teresa's order. Yes, I would love to go. So I went and I peeled potatoes, I chopped carrots, and that was the end. I don't know what I expected, maybe a nun to float in, but it was just ordinary time. And I remember thinking at the end of that, I'm really more of an intellectual. My time would be better spent reading books of theology. I never went back to the soup kitchen. So 15 years later, with my Catholic faith in total ruin, I realized that I had made a great mistake in making my faith so intellectual. I thought I had built an intellectual citadel against any threat to the faith. In fact, if I had gone back to the soup kitchen or done something like that to make my faith more into my bones than just in my head, I think my faith would have been stronger. So I would say advice for the laity, make sure your faith is not just stuck in your head. Make sure that you're doing prayer and acts of charity and mercy to make the faith more real in that way. And also, don't be a clericalist. Realize that the people in the church, they're good, they're bad, they're in the middle, but they're just people.
Tu by som rovno nadviazal aj ďalšou otázkou.
Here I'd like to mention another question. Are the sexual abuse in cases in the church a valid point to leave the church? I'd like to know the opinions of all three of us. Rod, you can continue in your
I think thinking. It's true that the sins of the priest do not negate the truths of the church. But what the sins of the priest and the bishops did for me was it made it impossible for me to consider that these things are true. For me, I kept fighting for years as I would read about these scandals and talk to the victims and their parents. It was like holding on to a hot iron skillet over a fire. Finally, I couldn't hold on anymore. And I always thought that if you lost your faith, it was a matter of an intellectual choice, that you no longer believe the arguments. I found out from experience that that's not really true. It may be true for some people, but for me, it was also my wife coming to me crying one day after Mass. She converted to Catholicism when we married. And she came to me crying and she said, I feel like for the first time in my life, I'm losing Jesus because of all this. And I felt terribly guilty and this horrible responsibility because she became a Catholic because of me. And now, because she was so afraid for our kids, she was losing Christ. So these are the sort of reasons that I left the Catholic Church. I told the Lord when I did this, I said, Lord, I don't know if this is the right thing to do, but please have mercy on me. I'm losing because I need you. And because of my own brokenness, because of the brokenness in the Catholic Church in this time and place, I can't find you there anymore. So, and for me, after I no longer felt responsible for cleaning up the church, I regained the things I loved about Catholicism. At the same time, God also humbled me intellectually and made me realize how wrong I was to have had such an intellectual faith. As an Orthodox Christian, I've tried to live a very different life.
Pre krátkosť času prejdeme k ďalšej otázke. Ak je autor otázky tu, tak môžete sa prípadne po skončení súkromne spýtať ostatných dvoch diskutujúcich. Naozaj existuje v cirkvi homosexuálna mafia, alebo ide skôr o preháňanie? Otec Andrej Kačmar.
Neviem. Tak prípad kardinála Mekerika je strašný, a keď si čítame celú tú správu, ale môžu existovať isté skupiny, ktoré bolo by klamstvom, ak by sme si zatvárali oči a sme sa nepozerali na to pravdivo, ale nazvať to nejakou mafiou, alebo neviem celé to, aby tá robila niečo, čo koná mafia. Nemyslím si, že by mala v cirkvi. Je dobré, že máme svätého otca Františka. To je moja odpoveď.
Vážite slova, ja to cítim.
Vážim slova, ale myslím si, že to je pápež, ktorý je na správnom mieste a myslím si, že aj ak je niečo také, tak som veľmi vďačný za to, čo robí a aké kroky on podnikol, aby oslabil aj pozíciu napríklad takejto nejakej skupiny.
Dobre, budem rešpektovať, že ste veľmi diplomatickí. Sestra Agnieszka?
Ja vôbec sa neviem vyjadriť na túto tému, neviem. Verím tomu a myslím si, že existujú kňazi homosexuáli.
I'm sure there are homosexual priests. And I know that if they meet each other, they create some group. I know they are connected somehow, but I'm not sure. I don't know how to answer if there is a mafia. Why in Slovakia these cases of sexual abuse are not talked about also from the position of bishops? There should definitely be much more cases of the sexual abuse than we know about. It's a very difficult question because the diocese bishop has a responsibility how he approaches, as I already described. The conference of the bishops it's not a competence, does not have a competence to resolve all the problems in the diocese. In each diocese there is a bishop. Also there's a commission from each diocese, but the bishop is the person responsible. This should be a question really for the deputy for the Conference of Bishops of Slovakia, so we will not talk about this more. But maybe we could answer this question. It's a statistical question. In Slovakia, is there abuse more of girls or boys? Sister Agnieszka, I could say that girls are more threatened by the abuse in families and boys in church. If we look at the statistics, around 20% of children face sexual abuse. So every 4 girl and every 6 boy. As for the age, the most risk is for around 11 years. The question from the audience, maybe last chance. Yes, there is a question. Maybe try to ask something different than we have on the Slido. Good evening. I cannot see the questions on the Slido, but my question is that this topic is usually connected to the question of the celibacy, whether the canceling of the celibacy would resolve all of this. Father Andrej, the critical group is also this one. It's not. We know that the great percentage of the abuses was in families, but also in the institutions and elsewhere. But it happens also, and not only where there's a celibacy, but also we know that anywhere where the marriage is allowed. So this means that maybe this would lower this number. Maybe it would not be so direct, but this year 38, 39 of the priests, which are usually the perpetrators, there were much more things influencing this act. There was alcoholism, so a lot of reasons why this happens. A certain form of lack of communication and relations of the priest, healthy relations. Are there no research whether the celibacy can have an influence on this? Of course. And we have to say that it does not happen in the families of Greek Catholic priests, but it happens also there. So we have to say honestly that the predators, the perpetrators, this celibatary life have never even lived. So this is really not a factor.
Yeah. That was a question I had about what is the rate within Greek Catholics of abuse, because I don't think celibacy causes abuse. That's a myth. I do believe, though, that from what I've seen in the Orthodox Church, I've been Orthodox for 16 years, that having a married priesthood dramatically reduces the number of gay men who come into the priesthood. And I think that it changes the ethos of the priesthood. I can't prove this, but it's just something that I have observed. Again, I don't think, I hasten to say, I don't think being gay makes you a molester. Absolutely not. But I think having a chaste celibate priesthood gives those who are molesters a chance to hide, within this community. And I think that it's probably less if you have a married priesthood, but I don't have the proof of that. I mean, can you tell us more about the Greek Catholic, sister?
Nie, ale tvrdím, že tak ako museli by sme vylúčiť všetky ostatné.
We would have to make them leave from all the other church, so from the Protestant church in every other church. It is really not a question of celibacy. I think we have the last 7 minutes. Let's move to another question. How do you explain the believers who still believe in this priest who has been accused of and found guilty of the abuse? It is really natural in the parish. There are still people, the division of the people who believe that it happened and those who do not believe it. It is very difficult. Depends on the information they get. What people say about it, are there media or the from the side of bishop. It is very natural that we meet people. These people, different people, the priest, as has been said, he doesn't seem at first to be this bad. So we cannot definitely say that this person will do it. It is very difficult to say. They are very intelligent. All of this sounds very unbelievable, that this exact priest that we have known has been doing something like this. It is very difficult. I think I have read in some of these interviews, Slavka Karkošová has pointed out that they are usually very friendly people, and we would never tell that they would do something like this. They don't have direct reasons. And how is this so tangled? As I mentioned, the process of grooming, the perpetrator, apart from having to groom the children and himself, even if he would took to some house of some of these children, they have to have an agreement of the person. So the guys would never consider this weird, why the priest takes them to the house or somewhere. These people, these priests are very talented, very intelligent and socially gifted. Everybody loves them, and really 90% people of the parish have experienced nice things, but unfortunately 10% of these people have had a bad experience. So some people cannot accept this, and they start to doubt everything. So the parish needs to make sure everything works in the society. So I'd like to add that when talking about the grooming, every investigator can do this. All of this is like waiting, and then it appears, and then we say, wow, we have not seen this and this. And I will skip this question. We'll keep this for the end. So the question, how the fathers should be able to have fight in these priests, and how to should they be worried about ministering in the church? Should this be the place for grooming? The safe place means that the faith of the son to the parents, when he says, I was at the parish, we were alone, whether the priest has took me to his room, whether we have alcohol or we have been looking at some photographs, if there is great relations between parents and children, So if the underage person goes with another person, there's no way the parents don't know about it. So this should be talked about. We have to be open in this. So there has to be control, let's say. So we should also be we should also know that not every priest take advantage of this. It's 4% of all the statistics in the world. As I work with this topic for a few years, there has been a crisis. I was like, I don't know if I can fight, and I don't know if I can go to a confession, because almost everyone is a perpetrator. So we doubt everything, but we have to rebuild the church on these pillars, and if we want to feel good in this place, in the church, we have to build a fight. So we have to ask why we cannot trust this priest, why there have to be a parent. So let's trust only if we have sure we can trust. So finally, all these cases that you know about influence your spiritual life. Do they influence your spiritual life? Do you have some crisis? Father Andrej, you can. As I was on the course in Rome for the protection of the minors, and we had a course of safeguarding, and yes, I'd like you to be brief. I'm dealing with this topic for 10 years, and for the first time I heard about this, it very struck me. So I had a lot problems to process this. I was very angry and stuff. So I don't want to leave the church. I would like to help clear everything. I usually have crisis from time to time, and there is some time when a person really deals with this, and you see that the students who have participated in the courses, they really want to continue in this, and then I am very happy. I want to continue, but then you meet these victims who do not trust anyone. Then I lose with everything, and I don't know what to do. So it is very difficult sometimes. Rod, maybe finish all of this.
Well, I did talk about how it affected dramatically my religious life, but I'll just say this, and this has stayed with me even in the 16 years I've been out of the Catholic Church. My experience with the scandal wrecked my ability to trust religious authority. I recognize religious authority, that God did create a hierarchical church, but personally, I find it almost impossible to trust. And that's difficult for me because priests are among my favorite people. I have so many friends who are priests. But I had to, in order to protect my own soul, my own faith, I had to put a barrier there. And this is a wound that I'm going to carry the rest of my life. I don't recommend everybody else follow this, but this is something that I could not escape. I mean, Christ was so merciful to me. I didn't lose my faith entirely, but I did have this wound of being unable to trust, and not just religious authority, but all authority, because as we've talked tonight, this happens in schools. This happens so many different places, and people don't want to see it. I'll end with this. A few years ago, I was at giving a talk at a Protestant college, an evangelical college. A pastor there said that he works as a spiritual advisor to young men who are undergraduates who want to go to seminary, Protestant seminary, when they finish. He said, there's 16 young men in my group. Do you know how many of them are addicted to pornography, meaning they want to stop but they can't? I said, maybe 4 or 5. He said, 16. So these are young men who are the best they have, who want to be pastors, Protestant pastors. This crisis is going to be with us for a very long time in all churches. because of the universality of hardcore pornography. I wish I had better news, but there's a reason that we don't trust.
Možno malá reklama práve na margo
Maybe
pornografie. Bude o nej reč.
some advertisement for when we talk about pornography. Tomorrow at 3 p.m. we will be talking about this topic. But to close this discussion, I think a lot has been said, a lot important things have been said, and I cannot think of nice ending. Maybe trust, but make research. Not every priest is doing this, but it is a challenge for all of us who have children to face this, and I believe that this discussion has contributed to this. So I thank you very much for staying with us late in the evening, and if you want, maybe talk about informally with our guests. Maybe buy a book or whatever. Thank you very much, Rod Dreher, Sister Agnieszka, Father Andrej Kačmar, for being here with us. Thank you for coming.
A prajem pekný víkend ešte.
And have a nice weekend.
Ďakujeme aj moderátorovi dnešného večera a ďakujeme aj všetkým našim partnerom a podporovateľom. Menovite je to Košický samosprávny kraj, DKC Veritas a ACN. Hlavní partneri festivalu Fond na podporu umenia, ktorý podporil festival z verejných zdrojov, spoločnosť Plaut, Opatstvo Radu premonštrátov, Lesy Jasov a nadácie Fides et Ratio. Hlavní mediálni partneri, konzervatívny denník Postoj, portál Nové mesto a denník Štandard. Ak sa vám páči to, čo Veselá robíme a máte radi tento festival, tak vás prosím, podporte nás aj finančne. Môžete tak urobiť prostredníctvom QR kódu, ktorý vidíte na obrazovkách, alebo prostredníctvom stránky slh.sk. No a bola taká náročná diskusia, trochu to skúsim odľahčiť. Keď budete odchádzať, stavte sa v BHD shope. O mesiac tu bude advent a advent je čas prípravy takej duchovnej na Vianoce. Aby ste ho nepremerhali s haneným darčekov, tak kúpte si darčeky už teraz v BHD shope. Napríklad takéto krásne ponožky alebo knižku Je dôstojné a správne, ktorá hovorí o tom, prečo budúcnosť našej civilizácie závisí od náboženstva. A samozrejme časopis Verbum, ktorý vydáva vlastne spoločenstvo Ladislava Hanusa a ktorý je časopisom, ktorý sa venuje kresťanskej kultúre. Veľmi dobrý. Toto číslo sa venuje konkrétne umeniu. Je to strašne ťažké hovoriť, keď mám plné ruky. Prepáčte. Tak. A na záver teda naozaj veľká vďaka, že ste prišli. Keď budete odchádzať, prosím vás, ešte vráťte tie staničky na preklad a pozývam vás pokračovať diskusie. Milí diváci, s vami teda sa lúčim a vás teda diskusii myslím v tej kaviarni už také neformálnej. Takže pekný večer ešte. Dovidenia.